Good afternoon, everybody. Shavua Tov. Welcome to a new week. It feels like just yesterday I said that, but clearly it wasn't. It was last week. Welcome to a new edition of the Israel Brief, brought to you by Lay of the Land. I'm Rolene Marks, bringing you those top stories every Monday to Thursday. And without further ado, let's take a look at those top headlines from today. And Israel's new government, just a week old, is getting to work. In the last couple of days, the new government has approved 36 diplomatic positions. These were reportedly stalled for the last 6 months, and some 36 very, very happy new ambassadors and consul generals will be winging their way around the world to represent Israel in their respective countries of appointment. Also yesterday was the inquiry committee voted in unanimously by the cabinet, and this will be the inquiry into the Meron disaster which took place at Meron over the Lag BaOmer festival, which saw 45 people being killed. This is the largest non-wartime disaster in Israel's history. Now, the probe will include investigating police, politicians, religious leaders, and anybody else. And the new finance minister, Avigdor Lieberman, has earmarked some 6 million shekels for this investigation. Also, over the weekend, it was reported that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reached an agreement with Naftali Bennett to vacate the Balfour residence on the 10th of July. There has been some controversy in Israel over the last week or so because the former Prime Minister has not vacated the Prime Minister's official residence. Now, while the new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett will not be taking up residency in Balfour, he will stay in Ra'anana so as not to disrupt his children's school routine. It is still the official residence of the Prime Minister, and where he will no doubt host international guests and delegations. Also up for investigation is a report that the former Prime Minister had apparently shredded documents in the Prime Minister's office before the new Prime Minister took office. Now, he is denying this, but apparently there has been some discussion that this did take place, and there will be a likely inquiry within the PM's office to see whether or not this took place and what kind of documents were shredded. And lastly, winging his way off to Dubai next week will be our Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, making his first official trip as Israel's Foreign Minister, and this will be to the United Arab Emirates, one of Israel's new friends as per our Abraham Accords agreement. And we hopefully look forward to many other countries in the region joining our increasing circle of peace. But the big question everybody has been asking over the last 2 or 3 days is, what is the story behind the Palestinian Authority's rejection of COVID-19 vaccines from Israel? This is more and more curious by the day. So let's break the story down. Israel reached an agreement with the Palestinian Authority that once we had finished or had been a long way through our vaccination rollout, we will distribute Pfizer vaccines to the Palestinian Authority. Now, these are the same vaccines that Israelis are receiving. At the moment, Israel is still rolling out vaccines and are vaccinating children from the ages of 12 to 16, and of course anybody else who hasn't received their vaccine. Now, the first shipment of about 100,000 vaccines had been received by the Palestinians over the weekend and then summarily rejected. And of course, Israel, that faced a lot of criticism when we started rolling out our vaccine as to why we were not vaccinating Palestinians, nobody has picked up on this story, which of course is curious in itself. The reason that Palestinians did not want Israel's assistance in the first place is, as per the Oslo Accords, the Palestinian Authority was responsible for its own healthcare as well as vaccines, but this was largely a humanitarian gesture on the part of Israel. And the Palestinians say that these vaccines were not up to the technical requirements they want. Israel has responded by saying it was made very clear to the Palestinians that these 100,000 vaccines were due to expire by the end of June, which means that several thousand could have received their vaccines up to now. The next shipments would include those that would expire at a later stage. And again, I stress these are the same vaccines that Israelis are receiving on a daily basis. So what is the reason behind this? Is it because the vaccines are coming from Israel? Is it because the Palestinians maybe don't want to expose the level of corruption on who would actually receive these vaccines? In other words, would they make it into the arms of everyday Palestinians? So these are the questions that people are asking. The Palestinians say they will renegotiate their terms with Israel insofar as vaccines are concerned. Meanwhile, at least 3 countries, and we don't know their identities yet, have appealed to Israel saying, hang on a minute, we'll take those vaccines that the Palestinians don't want because we are rather desperate to have our citizens vaccinated so that normal life can resume. So it is a great mystery, one that is getting more and more curious by the day. And our last story takes us to Iran, where President-elect Ibrahim Raisi, who won the election by a landslide over the weekend, this is by those who can actually vote in Iran, has reiterated that his country will not stop its ballistic missile program, nor will it stop its support for regional militias. Now, Naftali Bennett, Israel's new prime minister, has warned the world, saying that the election of somebody as extreme as Ibrahim Raisi is a wake-up alarm to the world. Ibrahim Raisi is known to be more extreme than his predecessors Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Rouhani, and is known as the executioner. In fact, he has executed many minors, many children under the age of 16. Clearly a great concern, not just for Israel, but for the region and the world as well. And Raisi has reiterated his wariness of re-entering the 2015 nuclear treaty. So there has been a lot of conjecture in the press as to how Israel is going to react to this, and will we up our state of readiness for any possible confrontation with Iran. Those are your top stories making headlines, but don't forget to check us out on all social media platforms. Where are we? You want to know? Let me tell you. Our original content, our website for all your reading pleasure, is on www.layoftheland.com. Online, you can read our original articles there. They're archived, and if you fancy yourself a bit of a writer, please contact us via our website or our email, which is layotland@gmail.com. That's layotland@gmail.com. If you are viewing this on Facebook and you haven't already liked or followed us, please click on the like or follow buttons, and don't forget to share this content. That way we get to tell Israel's side of the story to as many people as possible. And if you haven't subscribed on our YouTube channel, we are at the Israel Brief. Click on that big red button. You know what to do. And last but not least, we are also on Twitter at @LayOfTheLand5. That's at @LayOfTheLand5. So with today's top stories, I'm Raylene Marks. This is the Israel Brief, and we'll chat again tomorrow.